You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I called out both lines after last week. It was horrendous. There's no other really way to put what happened last week. There's no other way to describe it. It was awful. Over 300 yards rushing to Boston College. Oof. But today against Cal, both lines were terrific. Now, Cal's weakness is their offensive line. Their offensive line might be the worst in the country. I gave you guys the stats in the pregame podcast leading up to this. Cal's is like bottom 10 in the nation. They're like the worst in the ACC. They give up at least 3 sacks in every ACC game they have played this season, except for the Miami game. And by the way, that continues with Syracuse. They got to Fernando Mendoza. If we're looking at the sacks, Syracuse had 4 of them. Now, unfortunately, the stat broadcast that I have pulled up right now, it doesn't show pressures, but they got a whole lot of pressures on Mendoza. They had 8 tackles for loss as well. So the line of scrimmage on defense, it dominated. And by the way, on that 75-yard touchdown run by Davien Thomas, that was on Deuce Chestnut. Took a bad angle. I'm not picking on Deuce Chestnut, but you watch it back, that it was on him. It wasn't on the defensive line there. And if you look at the stats for Cal, it's very misleading when we're talking about this defensive line, because you see Cal and you're like, they had 23 carries for 166. That's 7.2 yards per carry. That's not very good. Well, I just told you that 75 of those yards came on one play, which wasn't on our defensive line. And Jaden Ott had 11 carries for 78 yards. He had 11 carries for 78 yards, which is an average of 7.1 yards per carry. You'd think that's really good, except that one of those runs was a 53-yard touchdown, which means that on his other 10 carries, he got 25 yards. He did nothing. Jaden Ott has been struggling all season long, in part because the Cal offensive line is horrific. But you got to give credit to this Syracuse team and this Syracuse defensive line for stepping up. Cal's weakness was their offensive line, and they took advantage of it. Now, how about our offensive line? It was really good too. Kyle McCord was sacked once all day. That's it. That's pretty good. You'll take 1 sack. Ideally, it would be no sacks. But they only let up 1. You can forgive that. That's fine. LeQuint Allen with another 2-touchdown game, by the way. 23 carries, 109 yards, 2 scores, 4.7 yards per carry, a long of 30. He had that 30-yard touchdown run in the first half. Offensive line, it kept Kyle McCord clean. Offensive line paved the way for LeQuint Allen. And that's a large reason why Syracuse racked up 471 total yards of offense and 33 points. So the offensive line and the defensive line for Syracuse, they did a complete 180 from last week. And by the way, Coach Fran Brown, congratulations. You get to take a shower with soap, apparently, because your team won. Good for you. 7 wins now for Syracuse football, in large part because their line play today was outstanding. Outstanding. When you give Kyle McCord time, we have seen throughout this season, when you give him time, good things are going to happen. They are. He's going to hit his guys. He was 29 for 46, 323 and a touchdown. Only really put the ball in harm's way once, and that was in the fourth quarter. Nearly got picked 6 by Noah Williams. But I blame that more on play calling, even though the decision wasn't very good either. Trevor Pena, 11 catches, 97 yards. Oronde Gadsden, 8 for 109. Jackson Meeks, 4 for 38 and a touchdown. You give Kyle McCord time, he can do damage. He can find his guys. You give LeQuint Allen just a little bit of space, and he can get you 109 yards and 2 scores. So shout out to the offensive line and the defensive line for Syracuse for a very, very good performance, a huge bounce back for this team. They really needed it. We'll talk about it, how there's 2 more weeks left in the season coming up. We'll talk about the road ahead. But you needed this for morale. They really did. Last week was a little bit demoralizing. I mean, like, Boston College just punched them in the mouth. And today, it was Syracuse that was doing the punching in the mouth. So good on them for that. I got no complaints. I got no complaints over the last 24 hours. I got none. One of the very few times I'm ever going to do a podcast with literally nothing to complain about. I got nothing. Kai and Anthony committed about 24 hours ago. Basketball team, I mean, they didn't play well again, but you know what? They won. Football won. I mean, we 2-0 and a Kai and Anthony commitment. When was the last time? I'm going off on a little tangent here, so apologies for that, but just hear me out for a second. When was the last time that football and basketball won on the same day and Syracuse got a basketball commit within about 24 hours of that happening? Because I thought about it before I started the podcast, before I started recording this. It couldn't have been last year because last season, Donnie Freeman and Elijah Moore did not commit during football season. Elijah Moore was in like March or April, and Donnie was in May. So wasn't possible. The year before, they had William Patterson. I don't remember exactly when William Patterson committed. Maybe it was like over the summer, but I don't think it was him. So the earliest it could have been is 2021, when they got a commit within like 24 hours of both teams winning. And by the way, that commit was not Kai and Anthony. I got no complaints. What a win. What a weekend for Syracuse.